a second code enforcement officer, we need to have a fresh look at the skill sets needed. With the potential oil and gas exploration within the city, we've talked, city attorney and I, and police chief, about, are we going to need someone in that area of code enforcement that has expertise in oil and gas? Or are there other ways to enhance code enforcement beyond personnel, in terms of technology, in terms of taking a fresh look at our laws? We're coming back in April with a comprehensive, fresh look at the budget. Remember, we talked about that after first quarter, to the extent that we're able. So I would ask both Laura Newman, to make sure we're on the council agenda. I know we have to do that at least 2 weeks ahead of time now. That's the council agenda. So I don't know how far out you actually schedule. I know Amy Cox is here, how far out you schedule each agenda, but we want to make sure, hopefully the first meeting, if that's what you want, certainly the second meeting in April, we're back in front of you with, here's what's transpired since we talked about the budget last fall, and you made your final decision on it, and entertain ideas on how to go forward from there. And at that same time, we should specifically bring up the second code enforcement officer.
Another thing that's going to impact that too is we're in the process of hiring community service officers. And I've asked one of our commanders to see exactly what overlaps code enforcement and the CSOs. I think that's going to have some impact on the workload and the calls that come into code enforcement. There may be some sharing we can do to make it a little more effective.
Yeah, I'll just chime in with it. Yeah, you mentioned oil and gas, Pete. I would just suggest my limited involvement yet at the state level when it comes to inspecting oil and gas. It's my understanding we at the local level can inspect for the state the kinds of things that they inspect. So somehow coordinate with what the state is going to be inspecting. I would recommend don't waste time at the local level to follow up on something that we really can inspect. I'm not sure what that is, but I would just ask the question or get back to me and I can find you someone at the state level that could maybe work you through that maze. But it's my understanding that we probably can't go out there and inspect.
I think we can do
the mining activities.
Zoning type inspections, roads.
Yeah. But not the mining and the oil and the gas and things like that is my point.
Okay,
yeah.
I'll start asking those questions.
Well, and I've said to you earlier, Pete, that if the delay in the second code enforcement officer creates a burden in terms of complying with what needs to be done, then please come back. This is not a hard and fast deferral. It's just we thought we ought to take a look more at what specifically is going to be needed in that second person.
And that makes a lot of sense with this oil and gas coming on, that we have a position that's going to take up a lot. We need to make sure that that person's trained and maybe is hired with a certain skill set, other than the other code enforcement is going and looking at weed control and parking issues.
You know, Jan, I know this was an important subject for you, I remember, as well as me. Do we need to be looking at our laws with respect to code enforcement? Are they strong enough? Is it that we're simply not enforcing them, do you think?
I think we had cut back on code enforcement officers during the downturn, and I think we've seen the results around the city of there's code enforcement or code violations all over the city. And I know from my perspective, having an additional code enforcement officer who could actually go out and enforce some of the codes that are in place was important, just to keep the city looking good and clean. And of course, the oil and gas brings a new dynamic. But I think from council's perspective, we're primarily concerned about enforcing the codes that are currently in place for the city.
Okay. Well, the police department had recommended one new code enforcement officer this year. That's why we put our proposal, and we understand your position on that. So, anything else on the budget implementation? Any other questions?
Lisa Jones.
I can't reiterate enough, and I don't know how to get the message to the community more clear about the tennis courts that you brought up, because that was not about tennis courts. That was about the conversation of deferred maintenance and the policy that this city has adopted in putting off repairs and in the long run paying more for them. And that is something that I want people to understand, is this was something that was identified by city staff of having severe safety hazards, and that it was brought to council as we need to do some minimum maintenance and repair some things, because the fact is we own these tennis courts, or we're going to pay more down the line. So for citizens that are concerned about being conservative or saving money, that's where the original conversation came in. We just had city staff present a bridge presentation to PPACG about the amount of deferred maintenance that has been going on with our bridges. And that whole thing was to initiate a conversation amongst ourselves and to the citizens of saying, we have adopted a policy to keep putting things off, and then when we finally get around or we find some money, then we'll pay for it. And forget if it's 5 times more down the line. We saw that when we appropriated money for the seeds. We had done that the year prior. It wasn't maintained well. It wasn't watered well. The grass died. So what do? We appropriate $800,000 more. And that's what people need to get. This is not about a recreational sport. And it also is a perfect example of private-public partnerships, which we all have been talking about and we have been pushing. We've got private-public partnerships out there. They are fundraising. They are going after grants. And they have come to say, let's do some minimum maintenance, get some support from the city, and we will save some of these assets rather than it being $500,000 this year and citizens looking at paying $1.8 million in the next 2 years. And I don't understand why that message has gotten misconstrued or misunderstood. But I want to say, especially to conservative citizens, this was a responsible act. This was not just choosing a pet project, because there certainly could be a lot more things that we could put it to. It was sitting here saying, enough of the deferred maintenance, let's put it towards something, and it's even very minimum maintenance. It's very minimum maintenance to save the loss of assets. Now, if we want to get rid of these tennis courts or everything else the city owns, that's another conversation, but that is what that's about.
Well, and